How does one really determine how long those cycles should be for you individually?
Well, in terms of not so much just the individual cycles, but it really comes down to the number of hours that you should be sleeping. And so, what we want to do is typically what we find is that a lot of people are going to have that overarching thought of it has to be 8 hours.
Mhm.
But what we need to do instead is do a process to determine how much sleep you currently need at the current stage of life because it changes over the course of our lives. So, this is kind of the terrible joke that the universe plays on us is that we're younger and we feel like we're always tired and we never seem to have enough time for sleep. And then we hit retirement and we're up at 3 a.m. and we can't fall back to sleep and we're wide awake.
Mhm.
But if you think about how sleep is important for that cell growth and regeneration, we hit a certain point of our life and the only growth spurts are our waistlines. We're trying
not
to
growing a
stop
lot.
those. So it's okay for some people to say, maybe I've gone to bed at 9 or 10 my entire life. I used to get up at 6 or 7. Now I'm waking up at 4 or 5. It doesn't automatically mean something's wrong. Think about how much sleep a newborn gets versus a 6-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old. It's the same thing as portion size. I know I keep comparing it to food, but
Yeah.
think about if we think of like the senior specials and as we hit a certain point where we don't need as many nutrients because our body isn't as active. So the first piece is that it's going to change over the course of our lives, but how we figure out the specific number, there's a 4-step process, and that's kind of through the process of setting up the sleep window. Do you want me to jump into that for a
Yeah,
minute?
for sure.
Down, please.
Sure.
I think everybody's already trying to figure out what their number is.
Sure.
I know
100%.
that becomes one of the biggest things. And so what I'm going to share with you all, it's actually a strategy that is been identified as one of the gold standards to treat sleep. It's actually found is part of a treatment called CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And so if anybody listening, if you've been struggling with insomnia and having difficulty with sleep problems, there are a lot of providers that have this background. And the great thing is literally within a few weeks, you can help people to sleep better without having to take a lot of medications, without having to self-medicate. We've seen it work. I've seen it work personally across the spectrum with professional athletes, corporate executives, military, stay-at-home moms, retirees, everybody under the sun.
Yeah.
So how it works is we need to re-identify what's called your sleep window. And we're going to do it through a 4-step process. So if you all want to play along, step
Absolutely.
1 is we need to identify how much sleep you are currently getting. So you want to take your 7 days in the week and get the average. And right now, you may have different times during the week and the weekends. We're going to fix that and become more consistent. But if for any reason your average number is less than 5, your new number is 5. For everyone else, we need to be more realistic about it. So time in bed is not time asleep. And if you're awake in the middle of the night and all the tossing and turning, we're not going to count that. We're not going to pad the number because we're anxious and we're worried, well, if I'm not in bed long enough, I'm not going to get enough sleep. We need to start with reality. If the number is just 6, that's okay. We'll teach you how to build and grow that. And we're going to make those 6 hours more productive. So step 1, get your number. And this is where we are right now. Step 2 is we need to determine the when to get the sleep. And so that's where, as we're talking about getting the ideal number, we have to start with reality, and we're going to follow this 4-step process to get to the ideal number.
Mm-hmm.
So step 1 is the number. Step 2, for the when, we actually work backwards. So I want you to start with the earliest that you have to wake up. So maybe on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're up at 6 a.m. because you have a workout that day. Maybe it's 5 a.m. on the weekends because you're going to get up and go fishing or do a long run or take your kids or your grandkids to travel ball or whatever it is. Whatever that earliest wake up, that is going to become your new wake up time for the next 7 days. That means you may get up at 5 or 6 on Saturday or Sunday, but it's okay because when you're getting enough sleep, you don't need to sleep the day away to catch up. And by the way, it takes 4 days to make up for 1 hour of sleep. So that 2-day weekend is not enough to catch up.
Right.
But we can talk about that later. So we take our wake time, say 6 a.m. We take our number from step 1, and we're going to work backwards to get the full sleep window. So if it's 6 a.m. in 6 hours, that means my new bedtime is 12 midnight.
Mhm.
Now, midnight might feel really late. So if that's the problem, we can make it 11 to 5. We can make it 10 to 4. But we're not stretching the window.
Yeah, you got to keep the window. I get it.
Right. And let me give you an example. So if I had 6 inches of pizza dough and I put it in a 6-inch pie pan, it'd be nice and thick and even. But if I have more friends coming to dinner and I have to take those 6 inches and make it stretch into a 10-inch pie pan, it'll fit. I always say I'm Italian and I'm stubborn. I'll make it fit.
Yeah.
But it's going to have holes and gaps because there's not enough to fill the space. Well, if we've built up 6 hours of sleepiness, but we're trying to make it fit into a 10-hour window because it's cold outside, I want to hide from my kids. I spent a lot of money on that mattress. Whatever the reason is, no wonder we're waking up more times. And so that's why this strategy, not only does it help us to figure out the ideal number, but it also helps us to squeeze out all of those awakenings.
So if I understand you correctly, you're starting at the bottom. You're starting with your baseline of whatever the lowest number is.
Correct.
And so if I've been averaging, we'll use me.
Yes.
Let's say I've been averaging somewhere between 6 and 7. Sometimes I'll get lucky and it'll be more, but sometimes it'll be way worse and it'll be like 4 or 5 hours. But if the average, let's say, is around 6, then that's my number today.
That's your number today to start with.
And if I wake up at, let's say, 5 a.m., then that means my new bedtime.
Earliest wake up.
Right. Then that means my new bedtime for now is 11 p.m., which seems very late to me because I spend a lot of time just either playing on my phone or waking up or whatever.
Right.
So I'm squeezing in the window.
So think about like squeezing the air out of a Ziploc bag, right? Or, or people used to talk about defragging computers and such. So what we're doing is instead of having fragmented sleep, because you know how we talked about those stages of sleep? Well, at the beginning of the night, you're spending more time with your body healing and repairing. And then it's at the end of sleep where we're spending more time in that REM sleep with our brain repairing. Every time we wake up, we have to start that process over. So if you're waking up 2, 3, 4 times in the middle of the night, it's a lot harder to get to that REM sleep at the end.
It makes sense, but it seems so counterintuitive. I'm going to get more sleep by going to bed later.
But see, here's the thing.
Right, but I get it.
Right, so what's happening is you're actually getting more restorative sleep because your brain and body aren't having to constantly work to start over again. Just like Chutes and Ladders as a kid where you kept going back to the beginning, we want to be able to get all the way through the process. So it's the amount of sleep, right? So we need to make sure we've built up enough sleepiness to sleep all the way through the night, but it's also the quality of the sleep. So that's why you start with your earliest wake up. And part of the reason that it's so important to start with the earliest wake up is then our body and brain is always going to know what it has to work with. So if maybe sometime we stay up late, it was New Year's Eve, or we were watching a sporting event, or whatever the reason was, and we usually go to bed at 11, but now you're going to bed at 1. Well, if you're still going to get up at 5, your brain knows, okay, I have this much to work with. I'm going to optimize how much time I'm healing my body and how much time I'm healing my mind.
And finally, we'd like to thank Amundi Pioneer for sponsoring this podcast and our time with Dr. Milanak.